Hi y'all, welcome back. So like a lot of Americans, I consume alcohol on a regular basis. I love a good happy hour. I feel better and more relaxed when I have a drink, and I can always rely on alcohol to get me through a party and like help ease tension. And I used to think that I was just a social drinker and that my weekend indulgences were just like a normal part of daily life. But I realized recently that my relationship with alcohol could be healthier, and I wanted to go ahead and do what a lot of Americans do in January and examine my relationship with alcohol and see whether or not committing to a dry January would help improve my relationship or give me any insights into basically how I operate with alcohol and without alcohol. And in December, when I proposed this idea to myself, I was like, this will be easy, no big deal. I'll breeze through this and conquer this. But even in the first week of January, I realized that this was going to be more of a challenge than I first thought. So let's back up. Let's first talk about my relationship with alcohol. In terms of the American standards, I started drinking later than a lot of other kids or peers my age. And by that, I mean, I waited to at least college. I was still like in my first year of college, but that was the first time that I had drank alcohol. And although the legal drinking age in America is 21, the CDC reports 34.2% of people in the age group under 21, that means 12 to 20, have drank alcohol in that period of time before it was legal for them. Now, there's a lot I can say about the US legal drinking age, with some people saying that it should be lower, some people think it should be higher. Personally, I fall in the line that I think it could be lower, but I think that that is an entirely separate video and a separate conversation about harm reduction and risk. Either way, I was a late bloomer to drinking alcohol. And being that I was in college at the time that I first drank, and that college is known for pervasive drinking, partying culture, I was surrounded by drinking on campus, and I began to drink pretty regularly after I first started drinking. And at the time I began drinking and drinking pretty heavily with friends, it was just like a normalized activity. Looking back on it now, do I think that that was a period of binge drinking? Probably. It probably would have classified by the technical definition as binge drinking. Additionally, I think that the culture around blacking out and being so drunk all the time was just like the thing you did in college. The college drinking culture for people who go to college, and even like young adult drinking culture, really sets us up as adults for kind of failure when it comes to a normal and reasonable relationship with alcohol. Because a lot of us have been binge drinking since we were young, you just continue that into adulthood. However, things change as you grow up. And before I proceed and talk about the drinking culture in the US and all of that, I just want to say that I'm not judging drinking. It may sound like that and it kind of comes off a little bit like that, but I will be the first one to go to a happy hour, to like have fun, go out partying, go drinking. I think it's a great portion of life. It helps us be like socially together. And I think that taking a step back and looking at your relationship and how you interact with alcohol and what you want it to look like in the future is important. And I want to say that my qualms again are not with people who engage in drinking. It's really around like the pressure around drinking and the culture of drinking in the United States specifically, and the harms that can come from drinking and binge drinking specifically. I will be discussing these further in the video, but I just wanted to like lay down this disclaimer that drinking in and of itself and on its face value is not bad. But I think that it's important that we as a society look at drinking and what drinking culture says about us and says about our whole entire culture and society. But like I was saying, college really introduced me to drinking and drinking culture, and unfortunately, heavy drinking. And on the weekends, it was just kind of like a normal part of my life to drink heavily and go to parties. I continued this into my early 20s, with alcohol being a constant player in a lot of my friendships, which is something that people don't discuss enough or a lot, that if you drink, you'll have those friends that you're like, we only drink together. And I feel like as I've grown up and into my like mid-20s, which saying mid-20s makes me want to like vomit, but as I grow into that, I'm like, I need a little bit more from my relationships and friendships. I don't need as many drinking buddies. So that's one part of this that I wanted to kind of explore, what it means to be friends with people without having to have alcohol in the mix. And another portion is with age and with time, I've noticed that drinking just impacts me differently than when I was in my early 20s. When I was younger, I would be able to go wake up, and this is gonna sound psychotic, but I would wake up after a long night of partying, and then I would go go on long runs and I would be fine. It would be like no big deal. However, if I did that now, I think I would actually die. I don't think I would make it through. I sometimes have like a very long extended period of like just feeling ill, feeling sick, and I haven't even had that much to drink. So I think that that was also something I wanted to investigate. And additionally, I think that the mental consequences of drinking for me have just really gotten to the point where I need to also take a step back, because I don't know about anybody else, but the Sunday scaries and the anxiety drinking the day afterwards has just really gotten to me, and I don't feel like I want that in my life anymore. So with all that being said, and as the new year approached, I decided I wanted to examine my relationship with alcohol and start off my new year with a new outlook on drinking. I decided I would commit to the whole month of not drinking, and I would attempt a dry January. So with that, I just wanted to share some of my experiences with dry January. Coming up is my first weekend of no alcohol for dry January, and something that I heard was really helpful is instead of drinking alcohol and having a like alcoholic beverage, what you can do instead is having like a non-alcoholic but still like a cute beverage. I have some Spindrifts in my fridge, but I really wanted to try the recess drinks because they're kind of CBD infused. And another thing I want to do in this dry January is also be completely free of all other substances that I would usually take, but I'm just cutting it all out for a whole month. And so I thought I'd supplement it with a CBD drink. Okay, one, I realize now editing that I did not actually pick up the CBD version. I just picked up the adaptogen version, but this was the first weekend and it was really tough. I included a clip of like my real honest thoughts after the first week, but this was rough. And I think that having these recess drinks and these cute little drinks kind of kept my mind off of it. But January is a really tough month, and I think that it was just a really hard thing to kind of not have this crutch and not have this thing I've relied upon for a very long time. And even though I had other things to fill my time, I just felt like a little bit empty. And I don't think I realized until I started that I would feel this way, and it was kind of eye-opening. Okay, I know this is a bit of a weird angle, but I kind of wanted to give you an update about the second week of dry January. So I think that the first week was really mentally and physically tough because it was like right after the holidays. You've been drinking a lot, or at least in my case, I'd been drinking a lot. And so I wasn't really like, I don't know, I was in like a headspace of going from like drinking a lot to like nothing, and it was really hard. And also January, I always forget, is like a very difficult month. It's the darkness, it's cold, it's wet, it's just nasty. This week has been a lot better. I think that I had like one or two moments where I was like, gosh, I wish I could drink right now. But for the most part, I feel like I've just like felt better. I feel like I'm less bloated. I definitely have noticed it in my like stomach area a little bit. I feel like I'm just like feeling less bloated, feeling less gross in general. And this is the hardest thing, is that like now that I'm going and like seeing friends and being around people, it's like what I would usually do is drink. But now, since that's not an option to me, it's like having to enjoy like the company of the people around me completely sober, which is part of what I wanted to do. It's part of what I wanted to do with this challenge, is to just like re-examine my social relationships without alcohol. So I'm really glad that this is happening, but it's going to be tough, because I feel like drinking is usually this crutch that I rely on when I go out and see people, and now that's not an option to me. So we'll see. I'm just gonna bring my own little cute little fun non-alcoholic drinks. So admittedly, I have less and less clips as the month goes on. I just continue doing things that I would normally enjoy doing. I started hanging out with people. I started going out with people and doing more things like completely sober, and it was difficult, and I'll talk about it more in the video later about how there's not much of a night scene when you're not drinking. But I think that like poppies and all these cute little beveraginos kept me going, but it was hard. It was difficult to finish, and I think that I have a lot of respect for this challenge. So those are just some of my experiences and thoughts during the initial portion of dry January, and let me just tell you, it was rough. I don't think I was mentally prepared. I don't feel like I was as prepared as maybe I thought I would be. And if I continue to do dry January in the future, I'll know what it feels like. But it was tough. It was like exceedingly tough. Now that we've looked at that, I want to discuss some of the statistics around drinking. According to the NIH, about 79% of people 12 or older within the United States have reported drinking alcohol within their lifespan, with approximately 63% of people reporting having a drink within the last year, and 48.7% of people reporting drinking in the last month. And although this is an interesting fact, and it kind of just sets the scene for prevalence of drinking in the United States, alcohol is not inherently bad, but alcohol can easily be used in excess if you're not careful. To highlight this, other statistics around alcohol from the NIH show that in 2022, about 21.7% of people reported binge drinking, with binge drinking being categorized as having 5 or more drinks in one setting. These facts show us that the adult alcohol usage and excess adult alcohol usage is pretty high in the US, and that binge drinking is considered a public health issue. So now that we know that there's some statistics around binge drinking, excessive drinking, and alcohol use disorder, I would like to look at the impacts of drinking alcohol. I feel like there's so many layers and so many different avenues of looking at the impacts of alcohol. So let's start with what's obvious, which is the physical aspects of drinking alcohol. So when you drink, a few things happen. 1, the chemical pathways in your brain slow down, causing you to have slower reaction times, slurred speech, balance issues, and memory problems. 2, your heart starts to beat fast and the blood flows to your skin into different parts of your body. 3, your digestive system attempts to break down the alcohol, which may cause irritation, abdominal cramping, constipation, and indigestion. 4, you start becoming dehydrated once you start drinking. And so these are the immediate short-term effects of alcohol. Cognitive issues, you're gonna have a bunch of different physiological issues happening at the exact same time. And if you've ever drank before, you may or may not have felt these before, especially the dehydration bit. So those are the short-term impacts. So when we turn our attention to long-term binge drinking or drinking in general, we see that it may lead to increased likelihood of cardiac arrhythmias, liver cirrhosis, reduced bone density, strokes, and other various types of cancer. While researching this, I saw a quote that the only healthy and or recommended level of alcohol use is 0, which while I find that funny, I don't think that that's a reality for a lot of people, and that's definitely not the harm reduction approach that I would like to take to drinking alcohol. Because if you're just saying you shouldn't drink it at all and abstinence is the only key, I don't exactly vibe with that, but I thought it was a funny quote. And although it's frightening to discuss these long and short-term impacts, I think it's important to understand the effect of alcohol on the body, and knowing these consequences can help people think more about their choice of drinking alcohol and what they'd like their relationship with alcohol to be in the long term. And here I will also note something that's significant, or at least significant to me, is that there's differences in the effects of alcohol consumption by sex. In comparison with males, females are at a higher risk of developing negative consequences related to alcohol use. Females are more likely to have a higher blood alcohol level than males, even when they drink the same amount of alcohol. This is due to a number of factors, but mainly because female bodies have less water and more fat on average, which means that we retain alcohol in higher concentrations than males. Additionally, females are more likely to be susceptible to the long-term impacts of alcohol use than men. All of this is really interesting to learn and is scary because alcohol really does impact females differently than men. And especially with the blood alcohol content, you have to be very careful as a woman, even though obviously this kind of can be utilized to penalize women. I think it's just important to be okay, let me just know that going into it, a night of drinking or just going out with friends, versus oh, women shouldn't drink that much because they're sensitive and they can't handle it. I think it's just important and empowering for women to know that there are differences when you go out to drink. In addition to the physical impacts of drinking alcohol, the psychological effects of alcohol use are very real and just as impactful as the physical aspects. So alcohol is something called a depressant, and it disrupts the normal balance of neurotransmitters in your brain. As you drink, you may initially feel more relaxed and less anxious, but as you start to withdraw from alcohol, it begins to have the exact opposite effect, leaving you feeling anxious and exacerbating negative moods. You may have experienced this effect. I know I definitely have, something called the Sunday scaries, where you wake up and you're like, why am I so anxious? What's going on? I have nothing to be anxious about. I just went out the night before drinking, and then you wake up feeling just anxious, paranoid, nobody likes you. And it's because your body is physically withdrawing and mentally withdrawing from alcohol, which is causing you to have elevated levels of anxiety and depression, which I think it's important that we recognize that alcohol can have these effects on people because it can lead to worsening of existing or pre-existing medical and mental conditions. Additionally, there's a vicious cycle that may occur when drinking alcohol. As previously mentioned, when you drink, you feel better, or you feel like you're more socially connected, or you feel like, oh, I'm like the funniest, greatest person. You just start feeling better usually. And then after you are done drinking, you start to withdraw and you feel worse, and you start feeling more anxious and more depressed. And so naturally, you may want to seek out something to help alleviate those feelings of withdrawing and feeling more anxious, which could lead you to either seek out alcohol again or potentially another substance, which again can lead to this vicious cycle of continuing or depending upon alcohol to help elevate your mood. And that can lead to a potential binge drinking or alcohol use disorder, which leads me to my next point. According to the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, 29.5 million people over the age of 12 in the US had a reported alcohol use disorder in 2022. This is about 10.5% of that age group, which is a large number of people, which somebody out there, you yourself might know somebody who has an alcohol use disorder. And there are many complex reasons for why a person may develop an alcohol use disorder, stemming from many social determinants of health. Like I mentioned, the vicious cycle of just like wanting to feel better and not have those withdrawal symptoms is just one reason for why people might seek out and might develop an alcohol use disorder, but that is not the only reason. There are so many reasons stemming from financial burdens, mental health conditions, housing concerns, so many different things that can lead to somebody developing an alcohol use disorder. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And again, it is important to destigmatize alcohol use disorder and have compassion for those who are struggling. If you or a loved one believe that you may have an alcohol use disorder, or you just want to talk to somebody about your drinking or mental health or anything related to that, please reach out to any of these number of services. I've also linked them down below. I think it's difficult to admit that your relationship with alcohol may be causing you harm, but it's also very powerful to take those first steps to get yourself or someone you love help. And I just want to say that, especially now, considering the state of the world, I think that there are a lot of people suffering in silence, and alcohol may be something that they turn to. And it's just important that we as a society uplift the people who may be struggling and help them, if they want to get help, access resources. So after that kind of heaviness, I'm going to pivot us a little bit and talk about the societal harms of alcohol and the negative repercussions of alcohol on an interpersonal, societal, and cultural level. On a societal level, our obsession with alcohol literally creates the spaces that we enjoy and colors some of our interactions. During this month, I had a very difficult time enjoying certain aspects of my life and hanging out with some of the people that I loved to go see because I was not drinking. I mean, brunch, happy hour, hanging out at someone's house, going out to eat, going to bars, obviously. There's just so many aspects and so many activities that we do that are just really intrinsically tied and connected to alcohol use. Especially as a person in my 20s, I felt like a lot of activities were cut off to me, which just kind of sucked. Even though I found other things, other than alcohol, little bevies and little things that I enjoyed other than drinking alcohol, it really did remain pretty difficult. So even though I was able to find some third spaces and different activities to enjoy sober during the day, I feel like a lot of my nights were spent just not doing as many activities because a lot of nighttime activities revolve around drinking, which is kind of unfortunate. And although I will go back to drinking and going out at night and having alcohol use involved in my life, I think it's really important to acknowledge that there should be more sober spaces or sober curious spaces or places that just offer non-alcoholic beverages that aren't $10 to $12, which is ridiculous. And my biggest gripe with this is that people are charging an arm and a leg in this economy for hyped up juice, and that is a problem. So in general, I think that as a culture, we really heavily put alcohol on a pedestal. And even though, again, I think that there are so many things about alcohol that are desirable, we don't really examine those undesirable bits because we just don't want to talk about them. And I think Dry January gave me a clearer version or perspective on how much alcohol influences our society. So what did I learn? What will I be taking with me forward as I move out of dry January? I think the biggest thing, like I mentioned, is just kind of examining my relationship. Everybody's relationship with alcohol is very independent and just kind of is your own. And so I will only speak to my relationship. I think what I've really realized is I love a little bevy. I love a beveragino. I think that if I have one in my hand, I'll just drink it. Non-alcoholic, alcoholic, I'll just start drinking it. I just love being hydrated, or I love drinking things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut back by like having an alcoholic beverage, then a non-alcoholic beverage, and splitting it up like that. Another thing I realize is I don't want to be hungover. I just don't want to do that. I need to put in safeguards like drinking more water, eating more, to make sure that that just doesn't happen for me, because I'm kind of sick relinquishing a quarter or a half or a whole part of my next day of a weekend to recuperate and feeling icky. So I need to find a way that suits me to not have that happen. And then just third is, like I mentioned, that we just don't have a lot of spaces and activities, especially at night, and especially for people in their 20s, to enjoy while they're sober. And we really need to, as a society, create more third spaces in general, not just like sober curious, sober, but just like third spaces. And if you're not sure what a third space is, I would suggest you go look it up. They're basically avenues for people to hang out outside of their houses, outside of their work, that just provide them like social connectedness and community. Anyway, so it was a tough month, I'll be honest. I think the fact that it was January and it was cold outside, and I've also just been incredibly stressed, had me thinking about alcohol a lot. And I think that that was scary for me to figure out that I had these thoughts a lot, because when I was drinking, I just thought it was so natural, like I didn't think about it. But being sober gave me time to reflect, and I think I've realized things I want to do moving forward, and I'll know that I can do this. If I ever decide to go completely sober or just like continue with a little bit of sobriety, I think I can do that. I know I can now, and I know how to like fill my time with things other than drinking, and to appreciate my friendships that don't revolve around alcohol, or if we can like transition our friendship into something that doesn't involve alcohol, which I did during this month. And I think I'll just appreciate it more. When I go out to happy hours in February, I'll be very thankful for the time, and I'll just think back and reflect on this whole entire month. So that is all I have for you. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.